British railways carried the war load. They met to the full the exacting demands made upon them by the United Nations at war. Railways entered the war at the peak of their efficiency. During the years before the war, they spent over £450 million on new works and improvements, a gigantic program resolutely carried through in the face of acute world depression in trade. Improvements were made to track, to signaling appliances, and to communications. Bigger and better engines were designed, locomotive depots were modernized and supplied with the most modern equipment. Turntables that work themselves, giant coaling plants that fill an engine tender in a few minutes. To the general public, the efficiency of the peacetime railway services was reflected in fast and frequent passenger journeys. But behind the scenes, the network of freight services was no less efficient. For the last 100 years, railway freight services have formed the backbone of Britain's trade and industry. In time of war, they are of supreme importance. Here again, improvements effected during the immediate post-war years enabled the railways, with their numerous depots and vast marshalling yards, to carry an ever-increasing load, munitions, guns and tanks, and to keep the factories that produced them supplied with fuel and raw materials. British railways were tuned for war. If the railways were ready for war, British railwaymen were ready too. Mobile vans toured the country giving instructions, and by the time war was declared, 1 in every 10 railwaymen was qualified in air raid precautions. Before the war was many months old, the number of trained ARP men had almost trebled. Sandbags figured largely in the early protection provided against air bombardment, but they were soon replaced by stronger and more permanent structures. Traffic control centers, vital to continuous movement of traffic, were duplicated in buildings which were bomb-proof except against a direct hit. However fierce an air attack, the railways must continue to function, so that thousands of railwaymen did not take shelter even when bombs were falling. For those who could take cover, shelters were provided near to their place of work. The blackout, with its retarding effect on operations, was the railway's ever-present enemy. Whitewash, liberally used, helped passengers and the staff to carry on. The whole system of railway lighting, in stations and depots, on signals and trains, had to be altered to meet the blackout regulations. After dark, screens prevented glare from the engine footplate, and from darkened stations, the trains ran through the dark countryside. War made many and varied demands upon the railways. Over 7 miles of passenger coaches were transformed into ambulance and civilian casualty evacuation trains. These trains pursued their errands of mercy in France. Some of them were lost when France was overrun. Soon after D-Day, they were back again, working in Europe. From Britain's ports, from the bombed towns, the trains took their wounded cargoes to the hospitals. Railway hotels, as well as trains, were taken over for war purposes. Several were converted into hospitals. Here, at Gleneagles Hotel, where travelers from all over the world used to foregather, the sick and wounded were brought back to health. Railways play a vital part in war strategy. When danger threatens, they must be guarded. At first, units of the regular forces provided this protection. But later, the job was undertaken by the Home Guard. Night after night, summer and winter, fair weather or foul, the men of the railway home guard units were on duty. Porters and engine drivers, clerks and executive staff, in fact all grades of railwaymen, some 90,000 of them volunteered for the railway units. In off-duty hours, the men trained in the arts of modern warfare until an efficient army stood ready to go into action had the necessity arisen. Evacuation of children from areas vulnerable to air bombardment was an important part of the national defense scheme. In 4 days, starting on September the 1st, 1939, 1,300,000 were moved from the big cities and towns. From the London area alone, 1,500 special trains were run. And when the flying bomb attack was launched on southern England, another exodus took place. So evacuation continued. From bombed towns, from countries overseas, from V-bombed London, the people were taken to the comparative safety of the English countryside. Other evacuation tasks fell to the railways, among them the transport to a place of safety in the heart of Wales of pictures from the National Gallery, pictures valued at millions of pounds. For the first 6 months of war, it seemed that all these precautions would be in vain. And then came action. Action swift and terrible that swept through Denmark, Norway, Holland, Belgium and France, until finally Dunkirk, a miracle marking the end of a disaster. From the beaches, the loaded boats came to Britain. From the ports, trains took the battle-weary men to the dispersal points. Besides Britain soldiers, men there were from all the European countries, but Frenchmen predominated. At the shortest possible notice, special trains were hurriedly assembled, and in the space of 8 days, 620 specials were run from 7 ports in the southeast of England. 2,000 coaches were formed into a pool from which the trains were made as and when they were required. At the busiest time, 100 special trains were operated in 24 hours. The population turned out to give the Dunkirk heroes welcome. At wayside stopping stations, mobile canteens were set up on the platforms and food and hot drinks provided. Members of the British Expeditionary Force to France were distributed throughout the length and breadth of the land. Rested, regrouped and re-equipped, these were the men who formed the nucleus of the greater army of Britain, then in the making, that later was to storm its way into the heart of Nazi Germany. News paragraphs, official publications and books have been written about the day and night bombing of Britain by the ruthless German Air Force, but little has been told of the thousands of railwaymen for whom there was no imminent danger signal. Even when danger was overhead, the vital work of running the trains had to go on. Ton upon ton of high explosives and firebombs rained down on Britain during the daylight blitz period, but railwaymen and women stuck to their posts and got the trains through. Day bombing proved too costly to the Luftwaffe during the Battle of Britain, and the switch over to night attacks by waves of German planes on our towns and cities was one which tested to the full the morale of the British public. Buildings were razed to the ground by landmines, incendiaries by the thousands set fire to property. But a train couldn't dodge a plane or a bomb. It just had to stop or keep on. And keep on they did. Deeds of heroism by railwaymen and women were legion. Over 200 were decorated by the King for gallantry in air raids. Some 282 were killed and over 1,500 injured. The courage of these people in the midst of bombing was matched by the speed with which the engineers repaired broken and debris-littered tracks and quickly enabled services to be resumed. Traveling cranes were kept constantly under steam. Heavy timbers and other materials were held in readiness for immediate dispatch to repair damage to bridges. Generally, the most extensive bomb damage to the track was repaired within 12 hours. Undoubtedly, the skill of the engineers and the hard work of the gangs under their control was helped by the organization for dealing with damage set up before the war. Emergency breakdown trains and stocks of rails and other permanent way materials were located at strategic points. Gangs could be mobilized immediately, and arrangements existed for reinforcements to be drafted in from districts adjacent to the damage. The railway system of Britain withstood the worst that Germany could do. Even the most concentrated attacks failed to interfere seriously with traffic. The organization for repair was such that delays were reduced to a minimum, and the internal lines of communication so vital to the United Nations war effort were kept open. Sandwiched between the exacting transport requirements for direct war purposes, the ordinary supplies of fuel, food and merchandise to sustain the civilian life of the country had to be distributed by the railways. 1,250,000 freight wagons of all types were in constant service to meet these vast and growing needs. Fleets of specialized wagons, developed by the railways in peacetime and totaling some 50,000 vehicles, proved invaluable in moving the war traffics. The transport of the finished products was but a portion of the story. The factories had to be kept supplied with fuel and raw materials. A single furnace producing 100,000 tons of pig iron in a year requires 120,000 tons of coke, 260,000 tons of ore, as well as large quantities of limestone and other materials. Britain's furnaces produced more steel than they had ever done. In a war of iron and steel, the furnaces had to be supplied with the materials to keep them in full production. Guns, shells, bombs and tanks got bigger and better. They presented new problems to the railways, who were called upon to move these awkward and cumbersome loads about the country. But the job was done. Many ingenious methods were devised to overcome transport problems. With this ramp wagon, the tanks literally loaded themselves. Remove one pair of wheels, lower the end of the wagon to the ground, and the tank is loaded under its own power. With this wagon, tank loading could be done anywhere there was a railway line, a valuable time-saving asset in a war where rapid movement was an essential to success. The total resources of the vast organization of British railways in both staff and equipment were harnessed to the task of prosecuting total war. The tanks, the guns, the mines, the bombs, and the men who fight them, these typify to the public a nation at war. And indeed, the ever-increasing production of factories crowded the railway tracks with these vital cargoes. But these were only the spearhead of modern war. And behind the spearhead were the 1,001 items of stores necessary to sustain the forces in the field. In the days of peace, millions of workers and their families were transported to the holiday beaches around our coasts. In war, the holiday expresses are no more, and the trains, once filled with happy, carefree people, were engaged on taking the factory workers between their homes and their work. 1,000 extra trains a day were needed for this task alone. The output of the workers, the vast supply system of which the railways formed so essential a part, reached fruition in the weapons of war. They poured from the factories in an avalanche, and as soon as they were made, they were delivered by the railways to the depots and the ports, ready for use in the theaters of war. Were the tools, the tanks, the guns, and the ships, and these the men who used them, the sailors, the soldiers, and the airmen, in the hot arid desert, in the high altitudes of the upper air, and in every part of the seven seas. They fought wherever the fight took them, knowing that behind them was the organization of supply, which played such a vital part in paving the way to victory.
Port Morris, California. Lieutenant, the westbound movement will be made by Chicago, Denver, and Salt Lake City.
Transportation officer at Miami, Florida says 47 flat cars are spotted now.
You've got the green light. Report when you clear Cleveland.
Hello, operator. I have a call in for Seattle. This is a hot move. Give it a high priority.
I just talked to San Antonio, Texas, and train number 21778 left the camp at 11:05 a.m.
Colonel Fitz, will you please carry these orders into effect?
Yes, sir. This is Colonel Fitz, Army Ground Forces. The commanding general has decided to move the 201st Armored Division by rail. Alert traffic control and everyone concerned.
May I have your attention, men? There's going to be 3 men in each section. Sleeping tonight. 2 in the lower berth and 1 in the upper berth.
What's an upper?
You'll find out tonight, boys. We're pulling out now, men, so at ease.
Attention, men. We're stopping at the next station. Be ready to get off.
Attention, men. Anyone I catch smoking in the berths will get KP for the whole trip. Is that clear?
Porter, can you tell me where this train is going?
No, sir, soldier. That's one thing I'm not allowed to tell.
I think we're headed to San Francisco because now we are in Tennessee. Nah, Tennessee's not there, it's down here.
The trains just run again. Bombed, sabotaged, blown up by the Nazis on the run, French railways are rebuilt by Allied engineers. On D-Day, following secret instructions, Marquis patriots wrecked locomotives, derailed trains, and tore out many sections of the railway system not already buckled by Allied bombing. When they started to retreat, the Germans, as they always do, destroyed what they couldn't take with them. Twisted steel and broken stone are monuments to a defeated conqueror. The Nazis burned their bridges behind them. Now, the French undo their own good work and help repair what the enemy laid waste. One by one, the rivers of France are crossed. Under the supervision of Army engineers, trained American salvage crews get on the job of rebuilding the railways. Working fast, these soldiers clear away the debris from dynamited bridges, swing new girders and supports into place. Nothing is thrown away that can possibly be used. The French understand how to make the most of what they have.
From bolts and nuts to boxcars and locomotives, the work goes on. Brought from America, stored in England, and now shipped in this specially designed craft across the channel, these tank cars are ready to roll from the beachhead to the front. With them come locomotives to replace those the Nazis wrecked. Boxcar after boxcar, a supply train for the armies to the east. A salvage train follows, taking skilled repairmen further up the line. Each of these railway ties serves to bring supplies 2 feet closer to the front. Foot by foot, mile by mile, the ruined railways are restored. At last, the sections are complete and the switch is thrown. A soldier at the throttle, once again the fast trains thunder across France. More trains a day than the Germans ever ran. First priority goes to hospital trains carrying the wounded, allied or enemy, back from battle. Night and day, these iron arteries of an army throb with life. Gas and oil for the tanks on the battlefront. Together, Frenchmen and Americans have done the job. To meet the German drive, General Eisenhower here at Supreme Headquarters resourcefully regroups his forces, giving Field Marshal Montgomery complete command over the entire northern sector. With Britain's famous Monty cleverly holding Rundstedt back in the north, his American counterpart, General Bradley, blocks the Nazis in the south. The great strategists in the British and American air and ground forces planned the Allied tactics. Britain's Air Marshal Tedder, Allied Supreme Commander Eisenhower, and Field Marshal Montgomery with their aides discussed military operations to stem the Nazi forces blasting through the Ardennes forest. On their great thrust into Belgium, the Reich hoped to reverse the Allied drive into Germany. Under Montgomery, the American First Army at Malmedy held firm against the concentrated Nazi fire. Malmedy is rubble and ruin, but the Allied lines are intact. In the south, Bastogne bears the brunt of the German assault. Americans encircled here fought on. Rescue planes rush aid to the trapped men. In Bastogne, the artillery crews had at one time barely enough ammunition for 10 minutes firing. Gliders brought doctors and medical supplies through to the trapped troops who defiantly refused every German offer to surrender. From the Dakotas fall more supplies to the men who held out for 7 desperate days. In one day alone, 400 American planes dropped 2,800 bundles of food and ammunition. Along the roads from the south, trucks rush more men and supplies. Escorted by clattering tanks, the relief column makes its way through the German line. Up ahead in this frozen landscape lies Bastogne, and a corridor must be cut through Nazi fire. German losses in the Ardennes offensive reach a record 100,000 killed, wounded, and captured. Nazi prisoners alone for all of 1944 total 1.75 million on all European fronts. Hundreds of German tanks are destroyed. The relief column reached Bastogne, herding their prisoners along with them. General McAuliffe is congratulated on his defense of the city by General Taylor, who, in America, when the offensive started, flew the Atlantic to join his besieged men. The men of Bastogne laughed once again. These men held the hinge of the line at Bastogne. They checked the impact and turned the tide of the Nazi assault. Once again, Hitler's timetable miscarried on the Western Front. In the dawn of a new day east of the Vistula, Russian armored forces attacked Praga in Poland in their drive on Warsaw. Colonel General Kosakov and his staff order a barrage of intense gunfire. Now the infantry move into battle. With the outer defenses of Praga smashed, one of Stalingrad's heroes, Marshal Rokossovsky, visits headquarters here near Praga, while tanks and troops push into the town. Polish regiments fighting with the Russians march ahead of the army through Praga's streets and receive a warm welcome. On the road to Warsaw, the Russian victory at Praga foretells the day of liberation for Poland.